cases of students and staff members who were present at school when we knew or we have evidence that they had COVID at the time they were at school. So for students, there's been 111 staff members, there were 9. And then you can see there's actually a column for active cases currently. So currently there are 26. You see each school represented there and the number beside them. Then,
So the first column where it says students and it says 8, is that what does that mean? Does it mean that we have 8 active cases, or is it a cumulative?
correct. It's cumulative from the year. There's actually a column that says active cases. So you'll see like at the primary school,
I see it.
there's 4 active cases currently.
And no
they
active
also-
cases. I'm sorry. No active cases at Waverly Gal and let's see. Is it 24?
14.
14 and 1. I mean 8. I can't see it very well from the side, you guys, so. All right.
That's correct.
And this column is from the beginning of the year?
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And just to clarify, these are just active cases that we know of that were on campus. So it's not including folks that children had at home and then they never came to school with COVID, like the family called it and they stayed home. This is just active cases at school.
That the parents
knew
have
of.
told us
Correct.
about.
Well, that we knew about.
Oh,
because
that
they
we
were
know
sent.
about.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Right, next slide. So we did just want to provide some information about quarantine and isolation. Cumulative for the year quarantine, there's been 1,878 quarantines. We obviously do not have that many kids in our school system, so we have some students, plenty of students that have never contracted COVID, but they've been quarantined 2, 3, 4 times. So that's why that number is larger than our student population. So of the students and staff quarantined due to contact tracing, we know of 7 students or staff members that actually tested positive and developed symptoms from a school contact. There's plenty of students that have contracted COVID, but not once they did contact tracing, it turned out there was a friend gathering over the weekend or there was COVID in the family. So there's been 7 quarantines resulting from our sending students home. So 280 students of the 59 staff members have been identified as having COVID since the beginning of the year. So that helps you, like the previous number on the first slide, that was 111 students because that's what we know of at school. So 280 is the total number, and that's only where parents have reported to our nurses or school staff that students were positive. So that's a more cumulative like community number of students.
Yes, I have a question. How many hospitalizations have we had for students in Madison County schools for COVID-19?
None that we're aware of.
Okay. Any parents talk about their children got sick enough where they thought they would have to take their children to the hospital?
Not that we've been told.
Okay.
And then the school has handed out over 300 COVID tests to families, and we do have plenty of COVID tests available to families. And then I just provided you the snapshot of quarantine numbers as of yesterday. Next slide.
These are 10-day quarantines that these are?
If you want to go back to the last slide, well, I guess we don't necessarily have to for this question, but it's changed over the course of the year. At the beginning of the year, quarantine was actually 14 days, then it went to 10 days, and now we're down to 5 days with a mask for your remaining 6 to 10 days.
And we had multiple children that had more than one quarantine?
Correct. Next slide. So just some other data that we thought. We thought about our school nurses. So there are 4 nurses that are contact tracing any given day. They spend between 6 to 10 hours a day contact tracing. They come in on the weekends. They did it over the holidays. So we're looking at per nurse, they've spent 600 to 1,000 hours contact tracing this year. And with that, I know Nurse Young won't mind me saying, you still miss some. It's not perfect. You're not always 100% sure of who that child has been around. Next slide.
Why-
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I have
Another question. The number of children that you were reporting, and that could be contacts from when they were having lunch and contacts from when, I mean, it's hard to pin down, but especially the high school, because the kids are, they change classes and they're all over the place. So you are trying to track down people who a child has been in the same room with or close contact with, no matter where they are in the whole building, and who they've come in contact with.
We talk with teachers, bus drivers, watch videotapes, and try to figure out which students are within the correct distance that needs to be quarantined. We also talk with the students and ask them who you possibly may have been around that we didn't see, like on video, or that we've missed, just to make sure we're covering everybody. But
It's an awesome
it's,
job.
It's a lot for them to try to remember, because
Yeah.
usually we're trying to think back 2, 3, 4 days, maybe passed over a weekend, so sometimes it can be a long time.
First, thank you for all your time, and on behalf of all the nurses, thank you for doing all that. And it can't be easy with people. It's contentious. People get excited about their kids in school, and they got to be strong feelings. Thank you for all your time. I'm curious about all that time trying to protect people. What are we missing? What are you not doing because your time is spent contact tracing? I mean, we have only a finite number of hours. So what is not happening because we're contact tracing so much?
There are a lot of, we are still working on doing our yearly screenings, like vision screenings, things like that. We may have to work evenings and weekends to gather data for reports that are due to the state. Inputting like vaccine information, things like that have to be kind of put to the side. Things we would normally put into our computer reporting system. So things like that.
We haven't hired anybody else. We're doing the existing staff that we've had before this. Is that right?
We've hired 1 additional nurse.
Okay, thank you.
So originally, I thought that's all I would have for tonight, is just some data for you. But then yesterday, the Virginia Department of Health released a new frequently asked questions document. And one of the main topics in that document was contact tracing. And I think it was in the news like maybe the day before that, where the Virginia Department of Health released that they were no longer doing such widespread contact tracing. And so in this document, they put out that schools are no longer expected to conduct contact tracing on every individual case of COVID. I wanted to put that little reminder up there as we go through our discussion, because sometimes people mix up words. When we're talking about COVID positive individuals, we say isolation. When we're talking about COVID exposure, we say quarantine. So they did lay out a plan, though, for when we should still continue contact tracing. And so if you'll turn the next slide. They still recommend that we do contact tracing in instances where there's an outbreak or sustained transmission. And so then they further define that for an outbreak. And I'm reading this for people at home. An outbreak is defined as 3 cases within the school link, so a person, a place, or time, without another likely source of exposure, or multiple cases comprising greater than 10% of a group or population without well-defined links, like in a grade or among teachers or school-wide. So then they suggest that if we have an outbreak and students are identified as needing quarantine, because they still recommend in an outbreak situation that you do quarantine, then that's where we have a program that we had just, on Monday, received our shipment for Test to Stay. So that's when they recommend using the Test to Stay testing kits, where then families can choose either you go ahead and do the 5-day quarantine and come back and wear your mask for days 6 through 10, or we do have tests, so students would be able to do 5 days of testing each morning and still come to school during the days that they're testing. And then masking is required the whole time to participate in that program through the state. Go ahead.
Yes, could I ask you to go back
Yes, sir.
to the slide number 4? The average time spent each day, 6 to 10 hours, is that for each of the 4 adults that are doing the contact tracing, or is that 6 to 10 hours total for those 4?
That's individually in each
Individually.
school, yes.
Okay.
Because by the time, if you have a handful, let's say 20 kids that need to be quarantined, that's 20 conversations on the phone. So that sometimes stretches into the evening and sometimes the next day, and sometimes it's still difficult to reach people.
Then if they're trying, it's more conversations than that, because you're also trying to figure out who that child's
Correct.
come in contact with, and trying to get in touch with those people as well. And you're working with a limited amount of knowledge based on what the children are telling you and where they've been, correct? Thank you.
You can go ahead and flip back to the slide. Okay. Were there any questions about the outbreaks? Go ahead.
One question. I have one question. And it says outbreak is defined as 3 cases or 10%. Is that gonna affect, I mean, how will that impact us? And how much of an impact is that on us, our current numbers? Are we there? Are we in a state of?
No, we have not had
transmission?
an outbreak, and we have not had 10% of our population with COVID at the same time. And the 3 cases would be, like, if I came to school and I'm positive and I'm best friends with Miss Young, and then I give it to her, and then in turn also give it to Miss Alexander, then we know we have something going on, and so the nurses are gonna investigate, like, who else is in your friend group, because y'all been hanging out and something's spreading.
And that's pretty rare, what you've seen.
Or if it's happening, it's not like to where the school's having to investigate. Parents have already gotten a hold of it because students are hanging out, on the weekends, having sleepovers, and then students end up getting sick. And a lot of this we need to keep in mind that our parents overall are doing a great job recognizing that their kids are sick and they're not sending them to school. So that's why the very first slide, our dashboard, looks as good as it does, because moms and dads are being moms and dads and they're checking for symptoms.
I have a question.
Yes.
About the outbreak situation. So like they had said we don't need to do individual contact tracing on everyone. So how do you find an outbreak with 3 or more cases if you're not doing individual contact tracing?
And you might want to answer that, but
Well, we'll still keep track of the positives
Uh-huh.
in the class. So if we
Okay.
know that and are able to keep track of if other kids end up testing positive in the classroom.
I see. So we're still asking people to report positive cases. We're still keeping track.
And they would still need to
And
stay home and
then when we
isolate.
start to see more cases, then we try to link them together. I see. Okay, that makes a lot more sense because I wasn't following that part of it.
I'm
Okay.
glad you asked.
Thank you.
And then if we ever, going back, Mr. Wingate, to the 10%, if we ever notice like a whole classroom of students or a grade level, there's a significant number, then we would know it's definitely time to contact trace again to get a hold of it. Next slide. Right, so students and staff members with COVID should, through all of this, continue to isolate and follow the health department guidelines if they are positive. For those recommended to quarantine, and this is stuff I'm reading is directly from the document. I'm kind of giving you the Cliff Notes version. I think it's 9 pages long. So for those recommended to quarantine due to exposure in the community, the health department recommends that schools consider excluding these people from the school environment according to public health recommendations for quarantine. I'm looking at the word consider. That would be difficult to do because, to give an example, Patterson's daughter is playing a little league sport, and she knows her daughter was a close contact. Well, she may call Nurse Young and say, my daughter's a close contact, I guess I should quarantine. Well, Mrs. Alexander's daughter may be there, and maybe she never lets us know, so her daughter wouldn't be quarantining. So it all just relies on someone self-reporting that. So we're not necessarily in favor of saying they need to quarantine if they're a contact, because that's not what would be doing at school, because we're not following every individual case. It's just a matter of watching for symptoms in their child like anyone else would be doing. So schools have the authority to direct a student to stay home from school due to illness or exposure, and this is just the follow-up advice for that. Due to COVID, as per school policy, and should consider CDC and VDH recommendations on isolation or quarantine when making these decisions. So that again is from the document. Next slide. So the guidelines do want us to consider impacts to the healthcare system, because it is an important component of decision making with the mitigation strategies. So I know like UVA Health posts daily with their number of COVID patients, and that is available. We would continue to offer the Vista screening testing program. Ms. Alexander runs that program for us with the testing company. So we have, how many participants right now? 24. So she doesn't have a mic, so it's about 24 active participants right now, and that's open to students and staff members. They test every Thursday, and the parents get the results. I think it's within 24 hours. Usually so less than 24 hours, usually the following morning.
So parents would just call and say that they would like to have their student tested every Thursday, or how does that work?
There was a permission form that went home.
Permission
shared.
form?
So we had lots of interest, but there's also a follow-up link that the parent would have to go on and register their child online. So anyone that's not registered in the program cannot participate even with the permission form.
Thank you.
So with this entire guidance document, parents are still expected to notify the school if their child tests positive. That way we're aware of positive cases. We would continue to put active cases on our COVID dashboard so people know when there's cases within the school. And then mitigation plan would still be in place. So parents are expected to screen their children for symptoms each morning and keep students home if they're sick. We're going to keep washing our hands and teaching students how to wash their hands and making sure we know the cough in our elbow. Physical distancing as much as we possibly can. Continue to clean our facilities. We have the higher quality air filters that we install. And like we said, we have the Vista testing program. And then we do have the Test to Stay program if we need it.
Mrs. Graham could also suggest, I had a Madison County resident that asked if we had looked into installing UV lights in the ductwork in the systems to kill those viruses that have flown through. I think that'd be a great idea to look into that.
We can look into that.
That would probably fit underneath the ESSER funds too.
Yes, it would. Any mitigation strategy, we can use that. Any question with this slide? Okay, so those are from the new document that we have out. Again, we weren't expecting this to come out, but it did. Pretty much what we've gotten from the health department is this variant is everywhere, and just as parents, speaking for myself, all the ladies up here actually, that we just should be monitoring our children for symptoms all the time. They just said it is everywhere, so always assume that you could be a close contact. Just as soon as you think they're sick, take the precautions you need to take.
Ms. Young, you have always been in close contact with our local health department, and then this information that comes in, state information, but I'm sure that both of you guys are probably talking to our local health department quite often.
Yes, we have a contact, Daisy Banta, with VDH that helps with pretty much everything COVID related, and we we are in contact every week at least.
Thank you.
That's all we have tonight, and then we want to hear from the community.
Any other comments or questions from anybody up here? Thank you all so much for all your reports and information. We appreciate it. And now we'll open the session for the public. For public comment, just a reminder that it's 3 minutes. And when you come up, if you would please identify yourself. And then we'll let you know when you're close to when you've gotten to your 3-minute limit. So, thank you.
Hand these up, there should be 7 for the 5 board, 1 for the superintendent, 1 for the clerk of each one of those documents. My name's Mike Sharman. I'm from Novum. The United Kingdom, Ireland, the Netherlands, and I think either today or yesterday, Denmark, have all abolished their COVID restrictions and said we're no longer in a pandemic, we're in an endemic. That is, this particular Greek letter that we have, Omicron, is a lot less vicious than the original was and less vicious than Delta. So I did my protocol. If you're sick, stay home. If you get sick at school, go home. Come back when your symptoms are over. Thank you. Which I think Ms. Graham and Ms. Alexander had essentially said that in these terms. It was my understanding that some of the parents are concerned that the board's past decision of making masks optional for their children, they were concerned that it was violating the law. And this kind of is a part of the movie that I came in on, I think it was last August, with the prior school board administration. They were under the same misapprehension because Governor Northam had misinterpreted a bill that had been passed earlier in the year. So one of the other, after my wonderful, long, heavily written protocol here, the next document should be the 2021 Virginia Uncodified Acts. And everybody should have the same highlighting on it. So uncodified means it's not part of the Virginia Code. It's not law. It was a bill that was passed. It's guidance, what the General Assembly sort of felt like, but it's not law. It's uncodified. You can search the Virginia Code upside, downside, you're not going to find it. And if you look all the way through it, you also see, because it's not law, there's no enforcement. That is, there's no teeth. You can't even gum you to death. There's just nothing there. The bill had said when appropriate, the school board is to update specific parameters. And I think the statistics that you heard and the questions that you asked show that it's really appropriate to start updating this stuff. Also, the emergency measures of the past governor ended in July. So the bulk of this uncodified act doesn't apply anymore because it talks about emergency. And the emergency was over by the executive orders saying it's over last July. It also says use currently applicable mitigation strategies. So currently, under this Greek alphabet, as those 4 nations I mentioned noted, this is a flu. We're going to be having it. We're going to be having these type symptoms. If you're sick, stay home. If you get sick at school, go home. When the symptoms are over, come on back. We know that 40%, there's been an increase for children of 40% more emergency room admissions since COVID's come in, of our non-COVID. So these other policies are creating problems for our children. So thank you very much. The final document is the Republican and Democrat who passed that act saying, no, the governor's interpretation was wrong. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman.
Okay, everybody can hear me okay? My name is Susan Polovich Keaton, and I'm the mother of 2 students in Madison County Schools. On behalf of my family, I would just like to thank the board for its most recent decision. I can't express to you how much this has made this big difference in my child's well-being, and just given my family a lot of hope. I'd like to voice my strong support for a proposed change to the quarantine rules as we've been discussing. My first point is that these school exposure-based policies cause a lot of harm and do no good. A recent study that's been reported in both the Washington Post and the New York Times has concluded that a mere 0.2% of the hundreds of thousands of students who have been sent home on these quarantine policies never test positive afterwards, and I think that we've seen that this evening. Those numbers are fairly consistent with this finding as well. Millions of days of opportunities for learning for these students have been lost, and obviously the nurses have been just working themselves into a frenzy, which I really appreciate, but we've got to do something about this now. My second point is that the lack of danger in changing the policy. By the end of 2020, approximately 1/3 of the US population had already recovered from COVID. Of course, we're only in January right now, but the experts who have been analyzing the data for 2021 are now opining that by the end of 2021, approximately 75% of the US population has already recovered from COVID. Even Dr. Fauci and Dr. Janet Woodcock, who's the FDA's acting commissioner, declared earlier this month that, quote, most people are going to get COVID. So why is this important?